the first time I heard him say it. We were standing under a chandelier that looked like it belonged in a different life than mine, and I still had the faint smell of diesel on my coat sleeve from my early shift. My daughter's husband leaned toward her with that tight, polite smile. He saved for other people's eyes, and he whispered, just loud enough for me to catch it over the clink of silverware, "I'm ashamed of your mother." His hand was already on the small of her back, steering her away from me like I was a spill someone needed to step around. I was 58 years old, a widow, living alone in a 2-bedroom condo on the quieter side of a small Ohio city. And I'd come straight from work to his company's charity dinner because my daughter begged me not to make it a thing. The air smelled like roasted rosemary and expensive perfume, and my fingers kept finding the edge of my transit authority badge under my scarf, like touching it could remind me who I was. I stood there with my purse strap cutting into my shoulder, watching my own child let herself be guided away, and I remember thinking, when did my presence become something that needed managing? I never told my daughter about my $60,000 salary, and in that moment I understood exactly what that silence had bought me and what it had cost. If you've ever walked into a room and felt yourself shrink just because someone decided you were too much or not enough, you probably know the kind of heat that rises behind your eyes, the kind you swallow because you don't want to ruin the evening. They called the event Hearts for Hope, which sounded sweet until you realized it was mostly a networking dinner with a fundraiser tacked on like a polite afterthought. My son-in-law, Graham, worked in commercial real estate, the kind of job where the suit mattered almost as much as the numbers, and he treated gatherings like this as a stage. My daughter, Lacey, had married him 7 years earlier, and I'd watched her learn his rules the way you learn the rhythm of a new house, where not to step, what not to ask for, what tone to use when you're grateful. She'd texted me that afternoon, "Please come. I need you there. Just don't talk about work like you usually do." And I'd stared at that message for a long time, thumb hovering, feeling something old and familiar, the urge to make myself smaller so someone else could feel bigger. I'd typed back, "Of course, honey," and then I'd gone into my closet and chosen the one navy dress that still fit me well, the one I'd worn to my husband's memorial service and then to my niece's wedding, and I'd ironed it with the careful concentration of someone trying to smooth out more than fabric. My badge, the plastic rectangle with my photo and name, M. Sullivan, and the Transit Authority logo sat on the counter by my keys like it always did because I never went anywhere without it. I wore it on a simple lanyard at work, but for the dinner I tucked it into my purse like a secret. That badge wasn't fancy, but it was honest. It said I showed up. It said I belonged somewhere. At the hotel, the valet took my old Corolla like it was something he'd rather not touch, and I pretended not to notice. The lobby was all marble and soft lighting, the kind that made everyone look smoother, younger. I found Lacey near the entrance to the ballroom, her hair done in loose waves that took time and money, her dress a pale green that made her look like spring. When she saw me, her face lit up for a second. The real light, the one I used to see when she was little. And then she glanced past my shoulder like she was checking who else was watching. "Mom," she said, and hugged me quickly. Her arms were warm but tense. "You made it." "I told you I would," I said. trying to keep my voice steady, trying to be just the right amount of cheerful. Graham approached a moment later, already holding a drink he didn't need, his tie loosened just enough to look relaxed, his smile sharp. "Marilyn," he said, like my name was something he'd learned to say for her sake. He looked me up and down, quick, practiced, and his eyes flicked to my shoes. They were sensible black flats. They'd carried me through a lot. Traffic wasn't too bad, I offered, because sometimes I still believed small talk could build a bridge. He said, and turned his body slightly, so his shoulder angled between me and Lacey, as if he was unconsciously shielding her from my presence. "We're about to go in. Try to keep it light tonight, okay? These people are big donors." Lacey's eyes flashed to mine, apology and warning tangled together. I felt my throat tighten. "I can keep it light," I said. "I'm not here to give a speech." He laughed, but it wasn't warm. "Good," he said, "because honestly, Lacey, I'm ashamed of your mother." He said it like it was a private joke between them, like I wasn't standing right there. My body went cold so fast I almost swayed. Lacey's face turned a shade paler than her dress, and she whispered, "Graham," like she was trying to stop a dog from barking. He didn't look at me. He looked at her, and then he glanced at the ballroom doors, where a cluster of well-dressed couples were entering. "She looks like she came straight from—" He let the sentence trail off, but the meaning was clear. Straight from a life he didn't respect. Straight from the kind of work that made your hands dry and your knees ache. Straight from being useful instead of being impressive. My fingers went into my purse without thinking and found my badge. The plastic was cool against my skin. I wanted to pull it out and slap it on my chest like armor. I wanted to say, "I earned every penny of my paycheck, and it's more than you think." I wanted to say, "I paid my bills, raised my child, buried my husband, and I did it without a single handout." But instead I stood there, smiling the way women my age have been trained to smile when a man is rude and you don't want to cause a scene. "It's okay," I heard myself say, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Let's just go in. If you're a woman who's spent years smoothing over other people's discomfort, you might recognize that reflex. It's not weakness, it's survival." Inside, the room was full of round tables dressed in white linen, centerpieces of pale flowers, wine glasses arranged like they were part of the decor. There was a stage with a microphone, a slideshow of smiling children on a screen, soft music playing under conversation. Graham guided Lacey toward a table near the front, and I followed, half a step behind, feeling like a guest in my own family. When we reached the table, I saw 2 place cards, Graham Whittaker and Lacey Whittaker. No third card. My stomach sank. Lacey blinked at it like she hadn't noticed before. "Oh," she murmured. "They must have—" Graham didn't miss a beat. "It's assigned seating," he said, already pulling out Lacey's chair. "You can grab a seat at the back. There's usually extra chairs." He said it like he was offering me a favor. I stood there, holding my purse, hearing the scrape of chair legs and the laughter of strangers. The back of my neck prickled. Lacey's eyes met mine, and for a second I saw the girl she used to be, the one who used to crawl into my bed after a nightmare and grip my arm like it was the only solid thing in the world. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "It's just, his boss is here." "It's fine," I lied. "I'll find a spot." I walked away before my face could betray me. I found a chair near the back, beside a couple I didn't know, and I sat down carefully like my body was made of glass. The woman next to me smiled politely and then turned back to her husband. On stage, someone was talking about generosity, about community. I stared at the bread basket and tried to breathe. I could feel my badge in my purse like a heartbeat. When the salad came, the waiter asked, "And for you, ma'am?" Because my seat didn't have a name, and I said, "Just whatever's left," because my pride had already been scraped thin. Halfway through the dinner, Graham stood up at the front with his boss and clinked a glass. He spoke with charm, with ease. He thanked donors, made a joke, said something about supporting those less fortunate, and people applauded. Lacey laughed at the right places. She looked beautiful and small beside him. I watched her clap for a man who'd just erased me from the table like I was a mistake. I excused myself during dessert and went to the restroom, not because I needed it, but because I needed somewhere to put my face. The bathroom was quiet except for the hum of lights. I gripped the edge of the sink and stared at my reflection. A woman with lines around her mouth from years of holding things back. A woman whose hair had more gray than it used to. A woman wearing a navy dress that suddenly felt too plain. I reached into my purse and pulled out my badge. My photo stared back at me, tired eyes, determined set to my jaw. M. Sullivan, Transit Authority. It was such a small thing, that piece of plastic, but it had gotten me through mornings when I didn't want to get out of bed, through nights when the bus routes were understaffed and the complaints were loud, through days when my back hurt and my bank account needed me to keep going. I pressed it to my palm until the corners left little marks. Then I tucked it back in my purse, fixed my lipstick, and went back out into the ballroom with a smile I didn't feel. By the time the event ended, Graham was in his element, shaking hands, trading numbers, talking about growth and opportunities. Lacey came up to me near the exit. "Mom," she said, voice low, "please don't be mad. He didn't mean it like—" "Like what?" I asked, and I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Maybe my body had already used up its shock. Like he didn't mean to say it out loud? Her eyes filled for a second. Then she blinked fast. "He's just stressed. He wants things to look a certain way." "I see," I said. "Well, tell him thank you for inviting me." "Mom," she pleaded, "please just don't say anything tonight." Graham strode over with his coat draped over his arm. "Ready?" he asked Lacey, and then he glanced at me. "You got home okay, right? Your car's fine?" That pause was its own insult. "My car is fine," I said. "I'm fine." He nodded like he'd checked a box. "Great," he said. "We'll talk soon." And then he steered my daughter away again, and she went because she was used to being steered. I walked to my Corolla alone, the night air sharp on my cheeks. I sat in the driver's seat and just held the steering wheel for a moment, my hands trembling, not from the cold, but from the effort of staying composed. The dashboard clock glowed 9:47. The radio was off. The silence was so thick it felt like pressure. I took out my badge again and stared at it in the dim light. Then, without really deciding, I drove home. My condo was small but clean, the kind of place you can keep under control when you're the only one living in it. The moment I stepped inside, I kicked off my flats and felt the carpet under my toes, soft from years of vacuuming. I hung my coat on the hook by the door where my husband, Dan, used to hang his. On the little table beside the hook sat a ceramic dish shaped like a leaf, and inside it were my keys, a couple of coins, and my badge spot. an empty space because it was still in my purse. I set the purse down and pulled the badge out like it was something fragile. I laid it in its place, and for a second the world steadied. That badge belonged there. I belonged here. I went into the kitchen, turned on the light, and the hum of my refrigerator sounded like company. I put the kettle on out of habit, even though I didn't want tea. Then I sat at my small kitchen table and stared at the wood grain like it might tell me what to do. A memory came to me, sharp and sudden, triggered by the faint smell of starch from my ironed dress, the same smell that used to fill our old house on Sunday nights. Dan would sit at the table with a newspaper and watch me iron Lacey's school clothes, and he'd say, "You take care of everyone like it's your job," half teasing, half admiring. Back then, it felt like love. Back then, being needed was a kind of warmth. Dan's hands were always rough from his work at the water treatment plant, but he could be gentle in the ways that mattered. When he died, heart attack, quick and unfair, I kept moving because stopping felt like falling. I took the job at the Transit Authority 2 years after, when my savings thinned and Lacey was in college, and I couldn't bear the thought of her dropping out. I started as a dispatcher, then got my commercial license and began driving, then moved into route coordination. People hear bus, and they picture something simple. But it was schedules, unions, safety protocols, angry passengers, winter storms, budgets. It was real work, and I was good at it. That night, I opened my laptop and logged into my online banking, something I usually did once a week, like checking the weather. The numbers appeared, my checking, my savings, my retirement account. I had a steady cushion because I lived within my means, because I didn't buy designer handbags, because I packed my lunches, because I didn't waste. My salary was just over $60,000 a year, plus decent benefits, and with overtime during winter storm season, it sometimes climbed a little higher. I'd never said the number out loud to Lacey. She knew I worked at the Transit Authority, and I let her imagine whatever she imagined. Part of it was privacy. Part of it was fear. I'd seen what money did to people's expectations. I'd watched friends become the family problem solver just because they had a little set aside. And if I'm being honest with you, I think a part of me wanted Lacey to see me as humble, struggling, in need of her affection. Like, if I didn't have much, she might cling to me a little tighter. I know how that sounds. It's not pretty. But grief makes you do strange things. It makes you bargain for closeness in whatever currency you think might work. Another memory hit me then, triggered by the kettle beginning to whistle, the same high sound as the old whistle on Dan's work thermos. It was the first winter after he died, and my car wouldn't start in the morning, and I stood in the driveway crying quietly because I didn't want Lacey to see. She was 17, already so busy becoming her own person. Our neighbor, Mr. Halverson, came over and jump-started my car without a word, just patted my shoulder with a gloved hand like he understood. That was the year I learned how to keep going while my heart lagged behind. I turned the kettle off and made tea anyway, something chamomile, something gentle. I wrapped my hands around the mug and felt the heat seep in. Then I opened my email and scrolled through months of messages from Lacey. Can you watch the kids Friday? Can you help with this payment? Graham says we should invest in... Are you free to pick up Ava from dance? The kids miss you. Most of them ended with a heart emoji or a love you, Mom. and I'd always answered yes or tried to. I'd babysat in their big house with the open concept kitchen and the white couch no one was allowed to sit on. I'd cleaned sticky fingerprints off their fridge. I'd brought over casseroles when Lacey had her second baby, and Graham didn't want to waste money on takeout. I'd slipped grocery gift cards into Lacey's purse when she wasn't looking, not because she needed them. Graham made good money on paper, but because I could tell she was always trying to keep up with a lifestyle that demanded constant feeding. And the more I looked, the more I saw a pattern. My help wasn't treated like love. It was treated like background, like something that just happened, like the heat turning on when the temperature dropped. If you've ever been the reliable one, the one people assume will handle it, you might recognize that feeling, the way your kindness becomes something others feel entitled to. The worst part was realizing how much I'd accepted being talked about like I wasn't in the room. Graham had never yelled at me. He didn't need to. His weapon was tone. A raised eyebrow when I mispronounced a wine name. A small laugh when I mentioned my job. "Must be nice to have something simple," he once said when I told him I was tired after a long week of storm reroutes and staffing shortages. Simple, as if keeping a city moving in bad weather was the same as folding napkins. I remembered sitting at their table last Christmas, the smell of cinnamon candles so strong it made my head hurt, while Graham's mother, perfect hair, perfect teeth, asked me, "So are you still driving?" like it was a phase I should have outgrown. And I'd smiled and said yes, and I'd felt my badge press against my chest under my sweater like a secret shame. That night, I took the badge from the dish and held it in my palm. I thought about what it had witnessed, my early mornings, my late nights, my quiet pride when I'd earned a safety commendation, the way my coworkers called me Mama M, because I always kept extra gloves in my locker for the rookies. My badge had been there the day I got my first real raise. Dan had been gone for 2 years then, but I still came home and set the badge on the counter like a trophy, and I cried because I wished I could tell him. I could almost hear his voice. "That's my girl, look at you." It felt absurd that a man like Graham could make me feel small when I'd survived things he'd never even considered. I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed and replayed the dinner like a scene I couldn't stop rewinding. The missing place card. The whispered shame. Lacey's eyes. I kept thinking about the word ashamed. Ashamed is what you feel when you've done something wrong. Ashamed is what you feel when you've hurt someone. I hadn't done anything wrong. I'd shown up. I'd loved my daughter. I'd worked. I'd lived. So why was I the one swallowing shame like it was mine to carry? Around 2 in the morning, my phone lit up with a text from Lacey. "Are you home? Please don't be mad." I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then I typed back, "I'm home. I'm not mad. I'm thinking." That was the truest thing I could say. The next day at work, the depot smelled like coffee and rubber and that faint metallic tang that always clung to the air. I put on my lanyard and clipped my badge where everyone could see it, right over my heart. I walked into the break room and saw Tasha, one of the newer coordinators, sitting with her curly hair piled in a messy bun, scrolling her phone while she ate oatmeal out of a paper cup. She was in her early 30s, sharp as a tack, and she had a way of seeing through nonsense like it was glass. "Morning, Mama M," she said. "You look like you fought a whole army in your sleep." I laughed, but it came out thin. "Something like that," I said, pouring myself coffee. Tasha watched me for a moment, her eyes narrowing the way they did when a route map didn't make sense. "Okay," she said, setting her spoon down. "What happened?" I hesitated. I wasn't the type to spill my personal life at work, but something about the fluorescent lights, the plain table, the smell of cheap coffee. It made it easier to be honest. I told her, quietly, about the dinner, about the missing place card, about Graham's words. I didn't even mean to say it all, but once it started, it poured out like water, finding a crack. Tasha's face went still. "He said he was ashamed of you," she repeated, like she was testing the words for sense. Out loud, where you could hear. I nodded, staring at my coffee. "And your daughter just stood there?" she asked, softer. "She looked trapped," I said, and my throat tightened. "I don't know. Maybe I'm making it bigger than it is." Tasha leaned forward. "Marilyn," she said, and when she used my real name, I knew she meant it. "You run this whole place when weather hits. You keep drivers from quitting mid-route. You talk down angry passengers on the phone like it's nothing. You are not somebody's embarrassing secret. And if your son-in-law is ashamed of you, that's his sickness, not your stain." I blinked hard. "He thinks I'm not polished," I said, and I hated how small the word sounded. Tasha snorted. "Girl, he thinks he's polished because he knows which fork to use," she said. "You know how to keep people safe. That's real." Then her voice changed, got quieter. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. I nodded. "My mom used to hide her wins," she said. "She'd downplay her raises, her promotions, because she didn't want people to ask for stuff or judge her. And the problem is, when you hide your strength, people start treating you like you don't have any. Not everybody, but the ones who like power. They love a person who looks like they'll take crumbs." She tapped my badge gently, like it was a reminder. "Stop giving them crumbs. Wear your whole self." Maybe you've had a younger person say something to you that lands like a pebble in your shoe. You can't ignore it because it changes the way you walk. That was Tasha's sentence. Wear your whole self. I drove home that afternoon with my badge still on, the lanyard rubbing against my neck, and I realized I'd been taking it off around Graham like it was something shameful, like it was proof I wasn't their kind. What kind was I supposed to be anyway? The kind that didn't make him uncomfortable, the kind that stayed grateful for being tolerated. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my old accordion folder from the cabinet over the fridge. Not a fancy file box, just a beat-up folder with tabs I'd labeled with a black marker: mortgage, medical, Lacey, taxes, retirement. I spread papers across my kitchen table and began adding things up, not in a dramatic way, but in the way a woman does when she's finally tired of guessing. I made 2 piles. One pile was what I'd given them over the years: babysitting hours, groceries, gas money for their emergency road trip, the time I'd taken off work when their nanny quit, the gift card I'd used for Lacey's postpartum supplies, the $2,000 I'd quietly transferred when Graham's commission was delayed, and they didn't want to dip into their savings. The other pile was what I'd held back for myself: my modest savings, my retirement contributions, the small trips I'd canceled because they needed me. The first pile was heavier than I expected, not just in money, though that added up too, but in time, in energy, in the way my weekends had become their overflow space. I stared at those piles and felt something in me shift from fog to shape. I wasn't angry that I'd helped. I was angry that my help had been treated like an embarrassment. I was angry that Graham could stand on a stage and talk about generosity while making me feel like I didn't deserve a chair. And I was angry, quietly, painfully, that Lacey had learned to let him do it. A third memory surfaced then, triggered by the smell of paper and dust as I flipped through old pay stubs. It took me back to when Lacey was 10, sitting at our old kitchen table doing homework while I balanced the checkbook. Dan was in the garage, tinkering with the lawnmower, humming off-key. Lacey asked, "Are we poor?" because a girl at school had said something about our car being old. I'd stopped writing and looked at her little face, her worry. I'd said, "We're okay. We have what we need." And she'd nodded, trusting me, and gone back to her homework. I think I taught her early that okay meant not making a fuss, not taking up space, not asking for more. That lesson had protected us then, but it was hurting me now. The next week, Graham called me on Tuesday morning while I was at my desk, route maps open, phone lines buzzing. I saw his name and felt my stomach tighten, but I answered anyway because old habits die hard. "Marilyn," he said briskly, "we need you this Saturday. Not hello, not how are you." "Need me for what?" I asked. "The kids," he said. "We have a couples weekend. Lacey told you." "She didn't," I said. "Well, she will," he said, like he'd already decided. "We're leaving Friday afternoon, back Sunday. Just stay at the house. It'll be easier." I looked at the route map in front of me, lines crisscrossing like choices. I thought of my badge, of Tasha's words. "I can't," I said. There was a pause, like he hadn't processed the sound. "What do you mean, you can't?" he asked. "I mean, I'm not available," I said, and my voice was steady in a way that surprised me. "I have plans." "Plans?" he repeated, with a laugh that carried contempt. "What plans could you possibly have? Maybe you've had someone talk to you like your time belongs to them by default. It's a special kind of disrespect, the kind that hides behind family." I swallowed. "My plans are mine," I said. "You'll have to arrange childcare." His tone sharpened. "Are you punishing Lacey because you got your feelings hurt at the dinner?" he demanded. "This is childish." "This is me saying no," I said. Another pause. Then he said the thing that made my skin go cold again. "Don't get dramatic, Marilyn. You're not exactly in a position to be difficult." "Why is that?" I asked. "Because Lacey and I help you," he said. "We include you. We invite you. We're patient." Patient. Like I was a burden. Like my presence required endurance. I felt my hand grip my badge at my chest. "You didn't include me," I said quietly. "You didn't have a place for me at your table." His voice rose. "That was seating logistics," he snapped. "God, this is exactly why. This is why it's embarrassing. You don't know how to act in these settings." I took a breath. "Graham," I said, and I let my voice drop into the calm I used with angry passengers. "You don't get to decide whether I belong, and you don't get to speak to me like that." He scoffed. "Fine," he said. "Be selfish, but don't expect Lacey to keep bending over backward for you." The line went dead. My hands shook for a moment, then steadied. I sat there in the noisy office, phone in my hand, and realized something strange. I didn't feel guilty. I felt relieved, like I'd been holding a heavy grocery bag too long and finally set it down. The storm came fast after that. Lacey called that night, her voice tight. "Mom, what's going on?" she asked. "Graham says you refused to watch the kids." "I did," I said. "Why?" "Because I'm not available," I said. "And because I'm not okay with how he spoke to me." She sighed, and I could hear the familiar strain, the way she was always balancing. "Mom, he didn't mean—" "He meant it," I said gently. "He said he's ashamed of me. Those are his words." Silence on the line. Then she said, very softly, "I didn't hear that." "I did," I said, "and I need you to hear me now." My voice trembled a little, but I kept going. "I love you. I love those kids more than I can explain, but I'm not going to keep showing up to be treated like a problem." Lacey's breath hitched. "He's under pressure," she said. "His boss, his parents, the clients. He wants everything to look perfect." "And I'm the thing that ruins the picture," I said, not accusing, just stating. "Mom," she whispered, and I could hear tears. "I'm trying." I closed my eyes. "I know," I said, "but trying isn't enough if nothing changes." If you're listening and you've ever watched someone you love shrink inside a marriage, you might understand the helplessness that rises in your chest. I couldn't fix Lacey's choices, but I could stop offering myself as the soft place where Graham could step without consequence. 2 days later, I took my lunch break and drove to my credit union, the one Dan and I had used for years. It wasn't some dramatic courthouse scene. It was a small brick building with a candy bowl on the counter and a teller who still called me Hon. I sat with a financial counselor named Mrs. Patel, a woman about my age with silver hair and kind eyes, and I told her I wanted to set clearer boundaries on my accounts. "Nothing shady," I said, almost laughing at myself. "Just, I want to make sure things are set up the way I intend." She nodded like she'd heard that sentence from many women before. "Who do you currently have as your payable-on-death beneficiary?" she asked. "Lacey," I said automatically. "And is that still what you want?" she asked, looking at me over her glasses. I hesitated. "I want my grandchildren protected," I said. "I don't want misunderstandings." Mrs. Patel folded her hands. "We can set up a trust designation," she said, "or we can name the children directly, depending on their ages and your goals. We can also limit access, so no one can act on your behalf without proper documentation." She said it simply, like changing a setting on a thermostat. I felt my shoulders loosen. "I'd like that," I said. We spent an hour adjusting things, updating emergency contacts, adding a second layer of authentication, setting up a small account earmarked for the kids' education that Lacey couldn't withdraw from directly. It wasn't revenge, it was clarity made practical. When I signed the papers, my badge hung against my blouse, and I watched my own hand write my name in steady ink. On the way out, Mrs. Patel smiled at me. "You know," she said, "people assume older women don't understand money. They assume you're confused or sentimental. But you've been managing a household for decades. Don't let anyone talk you out of your own competence." Her words settled in me like a warm stone. That night, I got a string of texts from Lacey. "Why did my bank app ask me to verify? Did you change something? Graham is furious. Please call me." I set my phone face down on the table, put my badge in its dish by the keys, and made myself soup. The world didn't end because I didn't respond immediately. The next confrontation came on Saturday afternoon. Graham showed up at my condo without calling first, which was typical for him. He treated access like a right. I opened the door and saw him standing in the hallway, jaw tight, eyes sharp. He looked around my small space like he was assessing it for flaws. "What did you do?" he demanded, not even stepping inside. "Hello to you too," I said. "Don't play cute," he snapped. Lacey says the bank flagged something. Why are you making things difficult? Because I'm allowed to manage my own accounts, I said. You're punishing us, he said, voice rising, because of one comment. It wasn't one comment, I said. It was a pattern. He scoffed. You're being manipulated, he said, and then he pointed a finger at my chest like he was scolding a child. You're getting old, Marilyn. You're making impulsive decisions. People are going to think something's wrong with you. There it was, the narrative. She's not herself. She's confused. She's aging. If you're a woman over 50, you might have heard a version of that threat, softly or loudly, when you don't comply. I felt my heart pound, but my voice stayed calm. Don't do that, I said. Don't try to make me sound unstable because I'm not doing what you want. He leaned closer. What I want, he hissed, is for you to stop embarrassing Lacey. Stop acting like you're some victim. You should be grateful we include you at all. My hands curled around the edge of the door. You don't get to use my daughter like a shield, I said quietly, and you don't get to decide whether my job is shameful. His eyes narrowed. Your job, he said, and he laughed bitterly. You drive buses. Please, you think that's something to brag about? I felt something inside me rise. Anger, yes, but also pride. I coordinate routes, I said. I train drivers. I keep people safe. I earn a living. I pay my bills. And I earn more than you think. He blinked just once, and for the first time his confidence wavered. How much could you possibly make? He demanded. I could have said it right then, 60,000. I could have watched his face change. But I realized something. The number wasn't the point. The respect was. And he'd already shown me he didn't respect me because of who I was, not what I earned. So I didn't hand him the number like a bargaining chip. Enough, I said, and that's all you need to know. His face reddened. You're hiding money? He accused, like he'd caught me stealing. From your own daughter? I'm keeping my finances private, I said, like any adult has the right to do. He stared at me like he couldn't compute a boundary. Lacey will be heartbroken, he said, switching tactics, voice suddenly smoother. She thinks you're on her side, and now you're acting like you don't trust her. That one landed, because it touched the soft part of me. I trust my daughter, I said, and my voice cracked just slightly. I don't trust you with my dignity. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. You're being ridiculous, he snapped. This family has an image. I'm not part of your brand, I said. I'm her mother. He took a step back, eyes cold. Fine, he said, but don't come crying when you're alone. And then he turned and walked away down the hallway, his shoes loud against the tile, like he wanted the neighbors to hear. I closed my door and leaned my forehead against it for a moment, breathing. My condo felt quiet, but not empty. Quiet can be peace if you let it. A few days later, Lacey asked to meet me for coffee. Not at her house, not with Graham hovering. Just the two of us at a small diner near my place, the kind with laminated menus and the smell of bacon that clings to your sweater. She arrived looking tired, mascara smudged like she'd cried in the car. We sat in a booth by the window, sunlight slanting in. She wrapped her hands around her mug like she needed something to hold. Mom, she said, and her voice shook. He says you're cutting us off. I'm not cutting you off, I said gently. I'm setting limits. She swallowed. Why didn't you ever tell me about your money? She asked. And there it was, the question I'd avoided. I looked at her, really looked. She was 34, a mother of 2, A woman who used to dance barefoot in our kitchen while I cooked spaghetti. Because I didn't want it to change the way you looked at me, I admitted, and because I didn't want Graham to see me as a resource. Her eyes widened. A resource? A thing to use, I said, and I hated how blunt it sounded. She flinched. He doesn't, she started, then stopped, because even she couldn't finish the lie. I took a breath. I never told you about my $60,000 salary, I said, and the words felt strange out loud, like revealing a private habit. Not because it's some fortune, but because it's mine. It's the result of showing up every day even when I didn't feel like it. It's the reason I can pay my bills and sleep at night. And I didn't want anyone to talk to me like I didn't deserve a chair. Lacey stared at me like she was seeing me, truly seeing me, for the first time in years. Her eyes filled. 60,000, she whispered. Mom, I thought you were barely getting by. I gave a small, sad laugh. I let you think that, I said. Sometimes I even acted like it, because it was easier than dealing with this. I gestured vaguely toward the world she lived in now. Image, status, Graham. She put a hand over her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. He's been telling me you're, struggling, that you need us, that you should be grateful. Her voice broke. I feel sick. I watched her crumble a little, and part of me wanted to scoop her up like I used to when she was small. But another part of me, older, steadier, knew she needed to sit in the truth. Honey, I said softly, you don't have to feel sick about me having a job. You don't have to feel guilty for not knowing, but you do need to decide what you're willing to accept. She looked at me, tears sliding down her cheeks. He said he was ashamed of you, she confessed, voice barely audible. Not just that night. He said it before. He says you're not the kind of mother he imagined, that you make him look less. Her face twisted with pain. And I didn't stop him. I just tried to make it smoother. I felt my chest ache. I know, I said. I could tell. She shook her head. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I reached across the table and took her hand. Her skin felt warm and familiar. I'm not telling you this to punish you, I said. I'm telling you because I want you to remember something. The way a man treats your mother is not separate from the way he will treat you. It's practice. She inhaled sharply, like the sentence hit somewhere deep. If you're listening and you've ever watched a daughter defend a husband at the cost of herself, you might be holding your breath right now. I watched my own daughter's face, the conflict, the grief, the dawning clarity. What do you want me to do? She asked. I could have told her to leave him. I could have told her to fight. But I knew life wasn't that simple. I want you to stop letting him use me as a tool to control you, I said. I want you to stop apologizing for my existence, and I want you to understand that my help is not automatic anymore. If you want me in your life, it has to be with respect. She nodded slowly, wiping her cheeks. Okay, she whispered. Okay. The next beat came from somewhere I didn't expect. My workplace. 2 weeks after the charity dinner, the Transit Authority held its annual safety recognition meeting. It wasn't glamorous, just a conference room with folding chairs and a tray of cookies that tasted like cardboard. But it mattered. The director, a gruff man who rarely smiled, stood at the front and said, "We're recognizing Marilyn Sullivan for exceptional leadership during the February ice storm. Her coordination prevented multiple incidents and kept essential routes running." People clapped. Tasha whooped loudly from the back. My cheeks burned. I walked up, badge swinging against my blouse, and accepted a framed certificate. The director shook my hand and said quietly, "You kept this city moving." I swallowed hard. In that moment, the humiliation at the hotel dinner felt like it belonged to someone else's story. This was mine. I took a photo with my coworkers, my badge visible, my smile real. Tasha posted it on the staff group chat with the caption, "Give Mama M her flowers." I laughed out loud in my car when I saw it. And here's where the modern world can be both cruel and helpful. That post didn't stay in our little circle. Someone shared it to the city's community page. A local reporter messaged the transit authority asking for a quick interview about storm safety. Suddenly, my name was floating around in a way that had nothing to do with Graham's curated image. Lacey saw it, of course. She texted me a string of heart emojis and, "I'm proud of you." Graham saw it too. I know he did because he called me that evening with a tone I'd never heard from him before, carefully pleasant. "Marilyn," he said, "I saw the recognition. Congratulations." "Thank you," I said, and I kept my voice neutral. "Listen," he continued, "my firm is sponsoring a community event next month. It's a public-facing thing. We're inviting local leaders. It might be beneficial for Lacey's image if you attend." There it was, the shift. 2 weeks ago, I was an embarrassment. Now I was beneficial. My stomach turned, not with fear, but with clarity. "Will there be a place card for me?" I asked, and I kept my tone light, almost curious. He paused. "Of course," he said quickly. "Don't be petty." "I'm not being petty," I said. "I'm being specific." He exhaled sharply. "Fine," he said. "Yes, there will be a seat." "Then I'll consider it," I said. "And Graham?" "What?" he snapped, irritation slipping through. "You don't get to be ashamed of me in private and proud of me in public," I said quietly. The silence on the other end was thick. Then he said, "You're twisting things." "No," I said. "I'm finally seeing them straight." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but I felt steady inside. The incoming storm from them wasn't just phone calls anymore. It was the group chat with Lacey's in-laws, suddenly full of forced politeness. It was Graham's mother texting me, "Can we get lunch? I'd love to hear about your award." It was Lacey asking gently if I could maybe watch the kids just for a couple of hours, because Graham was really stressed. I said yes once, for Lacey's sake, but with conditions: pickup time, drop-off time, no last-minute extensions. When Graham tried to push it, I didn't budge. I started putting my phone on Do Not Disturb after 8 p.m. I started taking my weekends back. I started going to a Saturday morning walking group at the community center, something I'd always meant to do but never had energy for. The women there were my age, my kind of women. Practical shoes, honest laughter, stories about menopause and grandkids and aching knees. One of them, Denise, brought orange slices like we were kids. Another, Helen, told me she'd learned to knit during her divorce and now made blankets for the hospital. They didn't care what kind of car I drove. They cared if I showed up. A fourth memory came one morning during that walk, triggered by the smell of wet leaves after rain. It took me back to a fall day years ago when Lacey was in middle school and we'd walked through a park together, kicking piles of leaves and laughing. She'd grabbed my hand and said, "Promise you'll always be my mom." I'd squeezed her hand and said, "Always." Back then I thought always meant unlimited access, unlimited sacrifice. Now I understood always could mean something else, always loving her, even while refusing to be diminished. The public payoff came at Graham's community event, the one he said would be beneficial. It was held at a renovated warehouse downtown with string lights and catered appetizers that looked like they'd been assembled with tweezers. Graham's firm had invited city officials, non-profit directors, business owners. He wanted to look like a man connected to the community. Lacey asked me to come, and this time her voice sounded different, less pleading, more hopeful. "I want you there," she said. "Not for him, for you, and maybe for me too." I agreed, but I set my own terms. I arrived early, wearing a simple blazer over a patterned blouse, hair brushed, lipstick on, and my badge in my purse, not hidden like a shame, but kept close like a talisman. When I checked in, the woman at the table smiled and handed me a name tag. Marilyn Sullivan, it read. And then she said, "Oh, you're the transit coordinator everyone's talking about. Thank you for what you do." Her tone held genuine respect. I felt my throat tighten. I turned and saw a table near the front with place cards for the sponsors. This time there were 3, Graham Whittaker, Lacey Whittaker, and Marilyn Sullivan. It was a small rectangle of paper, but it made my chest ache. I sat down and smoothed my napkin on my lap, the way I'd done 1,000 times, and I realized my hands weren't shaking. Graham arrived with his boss and a cluster of people. When he saw me seated, he hesitated for a fraction of a second, as if he'd expected me to hover at the edges like before. Then he pasted on his stage smile. "Marilyn," he said, loud enough for others to hear, "you look great. So glad you could make it." I looked up at him. "Thank you," I said. "I'm glad there's a seat this time." His smile tightened. His boss, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, laughed lightly. "There's always a seat for the people who actually keep this city running," she said, and she held out her hand to me. "I'm Dana. I've heard about you." Graham blinked. "You have?" he asked, a little too quickly. Dana nodded. "Transit safety matters," she said, like it was obvious. "My husband uses the routes daily." She turned to me. "Marilyn, we should talk sometime. Our firm is looking at a transportation access project. People with real experience are rare." Rare. The word landed like sunlight. Graham's face shifted, and I watched him recalibrate in real time, trying to decide if he should be proud, threatened, or both. During the program, the host asked me, unexpectedly, to stand when they thanked essential city workers. I rose, heart pounding, and the room applauded, not because Graham told them to, not because I fit their image, because I'd earned it. I felt my badge in my purse and thought, Dan would have loved this. Lacey stood too, clapping, and when our eyes met across the table, her face was wet with tears, but she didn't look ashamed. She looked awake. Afterward, as people mingled, Graham cornered me near the bar. "Don't enjoy this too much," he muttered under his breath, the mask slipping. "You're making it weird." I smiled politely, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "I'm just being myself," I said. "That shouldn't be weird." He leaned closer, voice low. "Lacey told me about your salary," he hissed. 60,000, and you acted like you were struggling. That's deceptive." There it was, his real outrage. Not that he'd hurt me, not that he'd humiliated me, but that I hadn't given him full access to my life. I kept my voice steady. "I didn't deceive anyone," I said. "I kept my private information private. You assumed what you wanted to assume." His eyes flicked around, checking who might be listening. "Family share," he snapped. Families don't keep secrets. Families don't shame each other, I said, still quiet, still calm. His mouth opened, then closed. For a second, he looked genuinely unsettled, like he'd never been spoken to that way by someone he considered lower on the ladder. "You think you're better than us now," he said, trying to provoke. "No," I said. "I think I'm equal to you, and that's what you can't stand." He stared at me, then turned away abruptly, his jaw working. The consequence wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was subtler and in some ways more permanent. The story he told about me no longer worked. He couldn't paint me as pitiful or embarrassing when other people openly respected me. He couldn't use me as a comparison to keep Lacey small when I was standing upright. A few days later, Lacey came to my condo alone. No Graham. She sat at my kitchen table, the one that had held my piles of papers, my tea mugs, my tired hands. She looked around like she was seeing my life clearly, my modest furniture, my clean counters, the dish by the door with my badge resting in it. "I didn't realize how much you have," she said softly. "Not money, I mean you, your life." I nodded. "I didn't show it," I said. "I was too busy trying to fit into your world." She swallowed. "I've been so scared," she admitted. "Scared of making him angry, scared of failing, scared of being alone." I reached across the table and touched her hand. "I know," I said, "and I'm not here to shame you for being scared. I'm here to remind you you're allowed to have a voice." Her eyes filled again. "He's furious," she whispered. "He says you're turning me against him." "I'm not turning you against anyone," I said. "I'm turning you toward yourself." She let out a shaky breath. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she said, "but I know I can't keep pretending." "That's a start," I said. We sat in silence for a moment, and the hum of the refrigerator filled the space, steady, ordinary. Then she looked up. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Why didn't you tell me about your salary?" I exhaled. "Because I didn't want to be judged," I said. "Not for being poor, not for not being poor. I didn't want my worth measured by a number." She nodded slowly. "I'm sorry I let him measure you at all," she whispered. "Me too," I said, and it came out softer than I expected. In the weeks that followed, things didn't magically become easy. Graham didn't suddenly become kind. He played nice in public more often, because he cared about appearances. But in private, he sulked, made snide comments, tried new angles. He told Lacey she was changing like it was an insult. He told her I was controlling, which was almost funny, considering how he'd been steering her for years. He tried to get her to pressure me for help, again, babysitting, money, favors. And when she hesitated, he accused her of being disloyal. But the difference now was that I didn't rush in to soothe the chaos. I didn't act as the shock absorber for their marriage. I kept my boundaries steady and boring and consistent. When Lacey asked for help, she asked directly, not through him. Sometimes I said yes, gladly. Sometimes I said no, and I didn't explain for 20 minutes. I started taking a weekend class at the community college, basic digital photography, just for fun, and the first time I told Lacey about it, she laughed through tears and said, "Mom, you're doing things." "I'm living," I corrected gently. The new normal wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I woke up on Sundays without dread. I cooked for myself without feeling guilty. I went on walks, met friends for coffee, sat on my balcony, and watched the world move without needing me to fix it. My badge stayed in its dish by the door every night, and each time I said it there, it felt like a quiet promise. I would not hide who I was to make someone else comfortable. One evening, months later, Lacey called me after the kids were asleep. Her voice was calmer than I'd heard in a long time. "Mom," she said, "I told him he can't talk about you that way anymore." My heart lifted and ached at the same time. "What did he say?" I asked carefully. "He said I was overreacting," she admitted. "He said you're filling my head." Then she paused. But then he got quiet, and he said he didn't realize how much it bothered me. He said he thought it was just jokes. I closed my eyes. "And what did you say?" "I said," she whispered, "that if he can joke about you like that, he can joke about me like that too." And I'm done laughing. I swallowed hard. "I'm proud of you," I said. She sniffed. "I'm scared," she admitted. "But I'm also tired." "Being tired can be a kind of wisdom," I said softly. "It means you're done paying for peace with yourself." There was silence. Then she said, "I'm glad you told me about your salary." I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "I'm glad too," I said. "Not because of the number, because it reminded us both that I'm not helpless." In the epilogue of all this, the object that kept showing up in my hands wasn't a dramatic one. It was my badge, plastic, scratched, ordinary, but it became something else over time. It was the first thing I reached for when I felt myself slipping back into old habits. It was the reminder that my life wasn't a favor I needed someone to approve. It was the witness to my work, my perseverance, my quiet competence. It was the silent ally when I sat in that credit union office and made my decisions. And now, when I come home at the end of a long day and place it in its little dish by the door, it feels like I'm setting down more than an ID. I'm setting down the version of me that used to apologize for taking up space. If you're listening and you're in that place where someone has made you feel small, maybe it's family, maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a boss, please hear me. You don't have to prove your worth to someone committed to misunderstanding you. You don't have to reveal every detail of your life just to earn basic respect. And you don't have to accept shame that doesn't belong to you. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't loud. Sometimes it's as simple as insisting on a seat, answering a demand with a calm no, and letting other people adjust to the new reality you've chosen. If you stayed with me all the way to the end, thank you, truly. I'd love to know where you're listening from today, what city or town, what country. Leave it in the comments so we can feel a little more connected, even through a screen. And if you enjoy these life stories and you'd like to help me keep making them, you can tap the Super Thanks button here on YouTube. It's a small gesture that makes a bigger difference than you might think. Thank you for spending your time with me, for your kind hearts and your gentle ears. On your screen, you should see a couple more stories I think you might like if you want to keep me company a little longer. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd be honored if you did, so you don't miss the next story. Until then, please take care of yourselves. And remember, you deserve a seat at your own table.